So some of these topics that I'll be bringing up, I will eventually read some of the books, but for the most part, I want to focus on the podcasts that you can find on YouTube from these people. Now, these stories come from people who live in those said countries and who are scholars, historians, and people who got a PhD or a master's degree in mythology. I will also add their YouTube channels under this video. Now, since Lughnasadh happened recently, one of the deities that is celebrated around the time of Lughnasadh is Crown Dove in Ireland, and I paired him with Ed Dove, and I will give you my reasons why. Not to be confused with the Irish king, but the god Ed, who is son of Dodka. And then we will go over their counterparts, their parallels throughout Iberia, Gaul, Lusitania, and Escarhela. And previously I talked about the relationship of deities while bringing up other forms of Celtic mythology with other ancient mythological stories of which inspired the Celtic beliefs from different ancient myths that existed before the Indo-Europeans. And sorry if it looks like I'm not looking directly at the camera, I actually have a screen. So I'm using this phone and then I'm using my notes. And there's from my book that I'm writing about, where I talk about Celtic mythology from all spectrums, including Basque mythology, and I compare it to the oldest myths in the world that existed before Indo-European times. I talked about how Lugh and Lugu had three brothers. One is actually being Nuada, and I talk about Irish stories of how him and Nuada are always kind of in a story with each other, and they're intertwined in some way, which actually sparked that theory. And then I brought up what I found in the verdict text. One being Nuada, in which I uncovered would be based on the Hindu god Indra. Now, when we talk about Nuada, we think of him having his arm chopped off, right? And there's Irish myths where he controls the weather, storms, lightning, sun. And in Brythonic mythology, there was a deity named Naudins who would most likely also be him, which that would predate Irish mythology. Other scholars have compared the Bellonos. And in Irish mythology is a fire deity similar to Granos of Gaulish mythology. And Delphicodius of Lucian mythology, and Hispanic mythology of Iberia. So Granos, a lot of scholars, they compare him to Bellonos. But inscriptions in ancient Britain say otherwise. There's been inscriptions where they're in the same area, but they would be separate deities because they have a different name. Not only that, but if we're talking about the case of, let's say, Agni Loka, or Agni, he was a god of fire, grains, harvest, hot springs, all those things. And when we look at the word granos, it's very similar to the word granium, which is Latin for grain. In Irish mythology, Ed is, in some stories, is the son of the Dodka. Also is discussed the true relationship between Lugh and Dodka, and how Lugh is also his son. And that would have to do with the archaeological record. We know that Lughus, spelled Lughus, is associated with Jupiter and Apollo. Now, the thing with the Romans and their parallels and the Greeks, their parallels would be based off the closest of what they have in their mythology, which is also Indo-European. So to fully understand, we would have to dissect what that relationship is. And then in Iberia and Portugal, Lugh is the son of Cossus. And Cossus is a figure that's like the dot god, or Tyrannus, or Sicalus, or Dudius. And I'll probably pull that up here. The Celtic gods of the Iberian Peninsula, Juan Carlos Avias Pedado. University of Alicante. In order to produce the profile of Celtic deities of Hispania based on the study of votive altars, a rigorous critique of the inscriptions must be implemented, estimating those that are not reliable due to their poor connection or because they were lost before the semantic analysis could be carried out on them. First of all, the areas in which certain groups of gods were worshipped are located in order to establish the scheme of the way their pantheon functioned. Next, groups of theons are analyzed to detect possible relationships between them in the areas occupied by the different Hispanic population. Finally, the main characteristics of the deities are established. And then here you have an idea of some of the deities talking about Gaul and Britannia and other regions, in which some figures found in Iberia and Portugal. Catastrophic floods. It is logical that those places where the believer could best preserve the power of the gods. The cult was expressed through the erection of altars, monumental columns, or through the construction of sanctuaries. This explanation fits in well with the fact that columns are located such as river sources and confluences were the vital importance of the people who inhabited those lands. One example is the column of Cussi, found next to the source of the river Urux that passes through Augustadium, Autun, the capital of Audi, in Roman times. The vignette, a second column, now lost, was located at the convenience of the Sena and Manin rivers, while another example of the column of the Note Paraceti. In accordance with these notions, it could be etymologically asserted that the theum Uranus, associated with Ibir and Gallia, is related to rivers. This could have been the original name of the Tarn River, a tributary of the Garonne River. Sorry about place names. Which Lenny called Taranis, or the Tarano River. In cases, it seems like the Hydromes owned their own origin to a place related to a cult of this deity, located in the source or course of these fluvial currents, which would be the Turin, the Turu, the Turinos River. Therefore, if we can establish a relationship between Bandu, the native communities of the Celtic god Mars, we can also confirm that Reu as a deity that belonged to the same religious pantheon as Bandua and belonged to the same pantheon as Bandu, was associated with mountain places, rivers, and the Celtic deities related to Ipir, such as Tyrannus, in regard of the third deity of the Lusitanian pantheons, Artadius. The first point that we can establish about the religious character comes from his frequent epigraphic association with the goddess Artadia, who would be like a goddess like the Morgan. For those who follow Irish mythology, we can obtain some information about this relationship if we compare it with evidence from outside the Iberian Peninsula, studying the devotee offerings found in the Gallic and Germanic provinces and in Britannia. It is observed that among all of the male native deities who have inscriptions dedicated to them, in which they appear with female deities such as divine couples, the majority correspond to gods associated with Apollo. And eventually I'm going to scroll down to find Colchis. No, I've already mentioned. I've brain dead there. I already mentioned Colchis and Rayo. So yeah, there you go. You have it. Associated with Ipir, Jupiter, and Apollo, just like I mentioned. For those who pay attention to Irish mythology, you will know Lugh is separate from the Dodka, and Artenia in this relationship would be Morgan. And there's other references too, that they are separate deities, but they are related in some way. He also mentions Bandu. Now, it's speculated what his role is. He could be a form of Balanos, and if he's not a form of Balanos, he could be a form of a god similar to that of Dion Ket or Menimiclear, because he's also said to be a warrior and a protector of villages. But yet again, so could Nuada, or so could Balanos. So it's very hard to say. That's just a complicated structure around Bandu and Bandua. I would assume that A would be the suffix of a female deity, which is also talked about in this book when he talks about other deities in the Iberian Peninsula. And I'm leaning towards more that the idea behind Bandua comes from the Brig and Briga, or the Barvo and Damania. Those seem to correspond with each other in some way. So this is just to show that some Celtic gods, such as Granos or Castellonius, are not the same as them. But they are related in some way. So there was some things that I guess I wasn't really gonna go over. Let's see, this is page 100. This is James McCaleb Celtic Dictionary, Oxford Journal. And anyway, Cramdov, which means Balak Crescent, a legendary pre-Kurdish Irish chieftain, as erasized in oral tradition from Count Currach. According to the stories of St. Patrick, comes from Cram Dove, is evangelizing the island, and the defeat of Cram Dove is commemorated in the naming of the Cram Dove Sunday, another name for Lughnasadh, or Garan Sunday, the last Sunday in July, or the first Sunday in August, which is this book right here. I highly recommend it, and it was also brought up and quoted by Anthony Murphy, Charles Squires, Dietrich O'Hagan. So more than one book, almost every book on Irish mythology talks about Crom Dubh and his associated with Lughnasadh, as well as the god Lugh. We talked about earlier about how Lugu and Bandua and Brig and Dovicolius in Iberia and Portugal would be the sons of the Celtic father god, such as Colchis and Arlanus. So this would be the reason why they would be celebrated on the same time of year. In France as well, Epona was also celebrated in August. Though that is not an Irish tradition, but according to most scholarly works and archaeological inscriptions, it just says August. It doesn't say a specific date, so we would have to point that to being August 1st. And also, there's a story from Basque mythology too that matches Irish mythology. There's a deity known as Zagori, who he was born to the goddess Mari. And Mari here is kind of like all of the goddesses that you hear of in one form. So she's kind of like the Irish version of Fand, even though in Irish mythology Fand is commonly known as the wife of Menevic Lear. It is possible she also could have been the wife of the Dodka, due to the Celtic deities having multiple consorts. And in the story, in Esquerra and in Iberia, they have a festival which is during the summer solstice, which has the same traditions as those celebrated in Lughnasadh in Ireland. And in Portugal, it'd be for Indovicolius. And on Anthony Murphy's podcast, where he reads a lot of books for you to hear on his podcast, he talks about Charles Squires' work on how Crom Dubh is a harvest deity associated with the harvest crops and grains. That could also be the same for that of Indovicolius, which is brought up by Juan Carlos Jarvis Pendado, and was also brought up by Arth Harger, who has a master's degree in mythology and history. He lives in Portugal. I will also put his channel under this video as well, so you can cross-reference that. And that same tradition of the sheaf that is being used in fires in Ireland to Portugal to Esquerra is also found amongst those stories. And that right there is another connection showing their true identity of how they're related. And then there's John Wilmot, who is an English-Irish historian. He brought up how the Irish traditions to him resembles that of the Slavic traditions. So you can see a pattern between Celtic and Slavic mythologies, which would make sense because in ancient times the Gauls settled in the Slavic territories. So I also got the book on here too about Slavic mythology, in which Slavic deities would have played a role in Celtic mythology due to cultures expanding and exchanging ideas with each other. And he talks about stones and offerings and ceremonies associated with Crom Dubh. So Anthony Murphy, John Wilmot, Charles Squires, James McCaleb, Juan Carlos Avias Pendado, which I am putting their channel under this video. I also want to read to you guys another book about Zagori and explain his backstory. One of the things that I'm going to discuss before getting into this book right here is that the Basque people aren't just Celtic, they're also non-Celtic peoples too, such as the Iberians, the Vascones, the McQuinty were Celtic and non-Celtic. So there's going to be references to Indo-European myths as well as not Indo-European myths. One of those things that I came upon reading is that of a goddess named Mari. And she's basically an all-purpose goddess. So she's basically like Indo-European goddesses, but she's all the goddesses wrapped into one, as well as pre-Indo-European inspired, but all wrapped into one, which is its own interpretation of a deity. We can find something similar to this in Irish mythology with the goddess known as Fand. And I don't know if there's like a tie there, a cultural tie there, that maybe the early Irish Gaels has gotten that from their links to Escarla. That is just a theory of mine. It could be, but most Celts, as far as we know on the archaeological record and other records in other regions, did not have an all-purpose goddess that we know of. But the all-purpose goddess is found in Ireland and in Escala, which is where the Basques live. This book is selected writings by Jose Miguel de Beredin. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Basque Prehistory and Ethnography. Also, I would like to mention in this video that I will be going over the topics that do have to do with the Celts that lived in Escadera, southern France, in the Iberian Peninsula. This video will not be about the non-Celtic references in the best ways, but rather than what came from those groups, such as the Aquiti, a mixed group, the Celtiberians. On the night of June 23rd, St. John's Eve, in addition to the practice noted above, a number of rituals also inspired by magical thinking can be observed. For instance, the custom of burning sheaves of straw in cultivated fields in hope that such combustion will cause the burning of the enemies of the crops that's planted there. So here we have a tradition of solstice fires that is around the time, around the time of the summer solstice, which over in Iberia and over in Lusitania or Portugal, which is a later name for Lusitania, and apparently Escala. It was around that time that they would burn sheaves, which is a common theme that seems to appear, in Ireland as well when it comes to Clom Dove. And that is one of the connections that I have made between him and Zagori. Zagori would be the son of Mari, who he was born through Mari as a red bull who lives in caves. And with that said, in Portugal, at the temple of Indovacolius, you could also see sheaves that were used as altars. And in Portugal, they were also burned around the summer solstice, or laid out as an offering for Indovacolius. Alright, now going back to where it was. There in La Arbuza, I believe that's how you pronounce it. La Arbuza. They are enemies of the crops, but carry a burning sheaf over the property. Sinin, Girer, Solon, Leverick, Esbargo, Betes, Fizik, Zegret, Shagak, Eta, Pested. I don't know how to pronounce that word. era on the property. No thieves is there are any. On our property, no thieves if there are any. Let them be burned. Let the wild beasts, the toads, the snakes be burned, and the harmful pest be burned. Now this right here he also mentions in the book sounds like a Christianization version of what would happen around the solstice fires. Also, according to this book, we have traditions that also seem to be possible Indo-European references or Celtic references amongst the native groups. What we just read about was solstice fires around the time of the summer solstice. There's also traditions in Escala about a veil that gets lifted that has a certain name in Basque. I don't know how to pronounce it, but and usually when it comes to what we know of the Celts and what we know of Ireland, that would happen in October to the early stages of November. And on that topic, I can't speak from like a perspective that in ancient times the Celts obviously they believed in the veil into this world and into the next world around every solstice or every equinox. That is hard to say, but it is a vast tradition. It could either be Celtic inspired or it could be inspired by the other inhabitants of the Pyrenees Mountains. However, there seems to be a conjecture when reading stuff like this. Keeping the hearth fire lit according to a ritual perception to the requirement of providing light for the dead, even if it was only a single straw, because of the practice of placing, Pyrrhus offerings of food intended for the dead members of the household. This is something that we could see in the Day of the Dead as well. And another thing that I would like to mention about this topic is on its page, it does not say whether or not this is a separate tradition or if it also has to do with the St. John festivities, which is found in the Cantabrians, the Austrians, the Galicians, and the Basques. It doesn't say if this is a separate time of year or the following celebrations and ceremonies and rituals around the summer solstice or not. And my initial thought was when studying ancient practices in other different cultures across the globe, east to west, I also noticed that there's a similar tradition amongst the Kalash people who live in Pakistan. They were a Indus Valley people, and it seems like this tradition of having houses set towards the sun for the dead to cross over was also something that was found in ancient Indus beliefs or Vedic traditions and Vedic beliefs, which also makes me speculate that this is in fact Indo-European and is Celtic in origin when it comes to the Basque and their identity and their traditions. So this is more likely referring to the times of what others may call Sawanos or Salmon or Samhain or other names. And these ancient customs of the Basque, not only are they solidified with the Vedic people and the Celts, but also this would be a way that they would bring in the new home. Of what it says on this page, they would refer it to kind of like a marriage, where the home and the person in the home makes a home together. Others would say it would be kind of like smudging in a way. And talks about candles and bringing candles into the household and welcoming the ancestors in their new home. And this right here talks about the popular importance of Zagori and how he is a bull. So not only do we have sheaves being used around the solstices and equinoxes similar to that of Ed Dove or even Granos in Gaul, but it is found here in Escahera for Zagari. And this is a story of when the goddess Mari was kidnapped and held captive, and she gave birth to Zagori. Mari has eluded her captive, who sometimes appears in her cave. She's the daughter of Uribi from Amisqueta, Armiskra. Others say she's the form of Urzi. You know what? I'm so terrible at reading Basque and I don't have a translator. I'm gonna just put the stories up for you. And then Mari overpowers the girl, and then she escapes and ends up having Zagori, and he's born a red fiery bull. And then after giving birth to Zagori, Mari gave her captive coal, and that became a golden comb that Zagori would protect, which is why Zagori protects the cave and riches. So there's a lot of references in Basque mythology to the Celts, but there's also non-Celtic beliefs, such as the cave and such as Mari. I feel like that's originally just Basque, even though there is an all-purpose goddess found in Ireland known as Fan. And there's some other things too that are just Basque. But as you can see, this fire deity associated with fire and grain can be indeed closely related to that of Endovicolius, a dove, and Granos, due to the fact of his celebration around the summer solstice. And the Celts, they didn't just follow the solstices and equinoxes, they also followed the lunar cycle, which we'll get into. So I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you very much. Goroa Mahaget.